We now will move into our next workshop, and this workshop is on the revised calendar and school start and end times. So, Mr. Superintendent, I believe you're leading us in this workshop today.
I am. Can you see my screen at this point?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, what I wanted to do, and hopefully it'll be fairly quick, is to walk through the relatively small change to the calendar that we will be asking you to act on at the next board meeting, as well as a proposal for some, relatively, we think, important but not huge changes, but that also are part of a sort of a move to, in time, make more significant changes to our school start and end times. So what we want to do is just explain those changes, and that's what we're setting out to do. So first, let's start with the calendar change. The calendar that you approved back in February wrongly accounted for the days in the month of October. So we had that there were 20 days in October, when in reality there are only 19. And so in order to remedy that so that we could get to the 176 student attendance days, what we did is we added an additional day at the end of the school year to make up for this. And so Thursday, June 9th is the last student day, and June 10th is the last teacher day. So that's fairly straightforward, and so we will be asking you to approve that calendar change at the next meeting, and then talk a little bit about the proposed start and end times. So for those who are members of the operations committee, or were members of the operations committee over the last couple of years, you know that this is something that we have been talking about on and off, is to try to make our school start and end times more consistent with the sort of the physical biological clocks of students. And, there's extensive research that many of you are familiar with. Certainly the committee is familiar with that, that suggests that, particularly for adolescents, the, really early start times that we have are very much out of sync with their body clocks. We had originally hoped to leverage the fact that this year, under the pandemic, we had to make some significant changes to our schedule. And as a result of that, we moved our elementary schools to earlier starts, and we moved our middle schools and high schools to later starts. And so you see, that what we did this year is we started middle schools at 9:45, ended at 2:30. But again, we also abbreviated the school day. So particularly at the high school, for the larger part of the school year, not so much in the current state, we really moved, we started later, but we also ended earlier. So there was no consequence, no impact of that change on, after school activities and things along those lines, because there weren't that many after school activities this year. So I think through our discussion in the operations committee, we determined that under a sort of a normal setting, so hopefully next year in a 5-day school year, 5-day week, that being our normal setting, that for us to be able to actually act on and make these significant changes, so moving our middle schools and high schools to a much later start than what we currently do, that would require a significant amount of community engagement. The district attempted to do this in 2015, and there was significant, concerns raised, and the board at the time pulled the plug on that. And so we want to make sure that we learn from that, and we want to make sure that we do the appropriate level of engagement. And given everything that we're managing this year, the operations committee was very understanding and agreed to give us, to give us the time to be able to take that effort into next school year. And so that was and is our plan. Madam Chair, I see that Ms. Jung has her hand up. Is it okay if we just pause and take questions along the way?
Absolutely, please. Go ahead, Ms. Chung.
So this is something that a lot of my peers and just people at Deering and I guess other schools have been asking about, like whether or not we're going to be able to sleep in next year too, and then go to school later. And it's something that everyone has been very excited about. And I'm sure there are good reasons for why we are opting to not do that, along with what happened in 2015. But I was hoping if you could just go a little bit more in depth, or just like specific concerns that the community had in 2015, because I probably want to give those reasons, those specific reasons, to tell people why like we decided to not do that.
Yeah, I wasn't here in 2015, so I'm going to have to rely on our resident historian, Board Member Thompson. In general, I'll say that that just the concerns have to do with childcare, late, sort of late activities. It throws a significant curveball to after-school athletics and student work, their ability to work, so to have jobs after school and things along those lines. But I don't know, Ms. Thompson, if you want to go into more depth on that.
I think you covered it. A lot of it too, Emily, was siblings that take care of one another and the changes, and they wouldn't be able to be there to get their siblings off the bus, and then the parents work different shifts and so on and so forth. So that was an issue. But also the difference, the surrounding districts that we compete with for sports weren't in tune with that. And then as well as transportation, we couldn't seem to get our act together for transportation. We did, as a result of the work in 2015, that's when we went to Metro. So that was one thing that we were able to move forward with. But there were several different issues, and I think the superintendent nailed most of them. So it's not that we didn't want to do it. It was just so many different dynamics coming into play at once. And actually, we heard very loud and clear from our various families. And it wasn't just certain populations, it was all populations saying, there's too many concerns about this. And I think childcare was the loudest one in sports.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. And so we do have a little, you get another 20 minutes of sleep next year if this proposal is approved. So not awesome, but a step in the right direction. Good to move on? Okay, so these are the proposed start times and end times for next year. What we have a 3-tiered system that is tied to our transportation, and we're keeping that 3-tier system, but we're moving it around a little bit, both in terms of the times and in terms of the schools that are affected. So basically, what we're doing is we're proposing to split elementaries into either end of the tiers. So have elementary tier 1 that would start at 7:40 in the morning and would end at 2:10 in the afternoon, and then have a second elementary tier that is that would start at 9 o'clock in the morning and end at 3:30 in the afternoon. And then what the change here is that we are moving the middle school and high school tier to what is the middle of that tier. So it goes to an 8:20 to 2:50 start. Again, to I think the point that Ms. Thompson raised earlier, the sort of the alignment with neighboring districts and things along those lines. because we get students from all over the region to paths, we have decided that for the time being that we would keep paths on the same schedule that it currently is, which is which is an 8 o'clock start time. So that's the one that we're not actually. So if you're a Deering student or a Casco-based student who goes to paths and you're in the morning session, you would be there earlier than you would be if you were starting school at Deering or Portland or Casco. So that's that's the change. So as I said earlier, it moves secondary to a slightly later start. The way that we're looking at this, it does to some extent leverage the changes that we started this year. So we are keeping the schools that were the early start schools this year. 7:45 was their start time. This year, we're shifting it just slightly to 7:40. But East End, Longfellow, Ocean, and Talbot are the schools that would stay on that early schedule. And in essence, what we're doing with the other schools, with the second tier elementary, is we're returning them to the same time slot that they had prior to the pandemic. So those are schools that at the time started at 9 o'clock and ended at 3:30. And so that we are returning to that same schedule for those schools. So one set of schools keeps their this year's schedule and the other school returns to their previous year's schedule. So there's at least some level of memory associated with that. The only one that's slightly different is Presumpscott, which was on the later end of the early elementary tier. So they actually started at 8:30 before, and they're shifting to the 9 o'clock start, but they were on the 9 o'clock start this year, or they were in the second tier this year. So they're staying with those same schools. So I see a lot of hands up. Ms. Chung, Ms. Thompson, and Mr. Burke.
Ms. Chung, was your hand up just from before?
Yeah, I just took it down.
Okay. Ms. Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question, and even if it doesn't change, can we please add the island schools to this so that they're stated, if they're staying one way or the other, or beginning and ending, because I think that's also was a big part in 2015 about the island schools. And then my question is the 20-minute shift on the high school. Do we know South Portland, Westbrook, some of those schools that we do compete with? I'm not sure, sport-wise, activity-wise, where they're at and how close we are.
There are several that start at 8:20.
Okay,
and this is not that a significant change. It's a 20-minute shift, so it's not.
No, and I just question on that was because before when we had talked about it was that we found more dismissals would be happening to get out for sports activities, etc. And so I'm just wondering how that aligns end time with other surrounding districts. So we wouldn't be dismissing students for the boat. We wouldn't be dismissing students for sports, whereas they would lose that time. So I'm just wondering how that compares.
And we can get that. I know just from our experience with paths that we're, I know Scarborough is at 8:20. I believe South Portland is at 8:20. I don't know all of the schools,
okay.
But,
So they would be the same end time then if it's 8:20 because they have to have the same.
Generally. Not necessarily because, schools have varying length of the school day, but I can get
I just don't want us to be dismissing students to make the boat or dismissing students for a sport continually. And my other question is around rec, and we've consulted with the city of Portland on the rec program, and that all jives okay.
We have, and that will be in the next slide, so we can let's just not talk about that until we get there.
Okay.
We can take questions from Mr.
Yep. Thank you. Yep.
Mr. Burke?
Yeah, thank you. My question comes as a parent of 2 young children and being community with many other families with similar situations, and that our children are getting placed in different schools, particularly for pre-K and elementary, and seeing this spread, there's it doesn't uphold what was in the letter, of pre-K about why the school, the pre-K day was going to be what the pre-K day was going to be, to align with, sibling schedules and that sort of thing. So this stresses me out seeing this, and I'm sure it's going to stress out lots of other families, and certainly ones that have less flexibility than my household. So just curious if you could speak to that.
So can you give me some more details about, I don't know.
I think I understand. I can maybe help out a little bit.
I'll just state clearly, just for the record, a student at Talbot, a student at Rowe, pre-K, and whatever other grade. So on 2 different drop-offs, pickup.
Right.
Yeah, and so what I can say to the stated goal of the sort of aligning the pre-K times is that was done, in the context of relative to the school. So that wasn't, you're raising up the issue of the fact that our elementary schools are split into 2 groups that have different times. And there are not many, but a handful of cases where, like yours, where you have a student in a pre-K program that's different than the neighborhood building that your K through 5 child goes to. So I think from my perspective, when we say we're moving the times, it used to be that pre-K started and ended at a different time. So families that had a child, let's say at Presumpscot in 2nd grade and a pre-K student, they were going to the same place with the same family, but they had different times. So that's the thing we were solving for. The problem you've named is different and, unique for the handful of families that are in the situation that you've described. Your own family happens to be in.
And is that true that it's handful? Because I seem to know the handful then, because it's more common the story that siblings would be split for pre-K and K through 5 placement than any other story that I've heard from other relatively younger parents.
I could follow up and look at that. I'm not shocked that you might happen to know that group because of my understanding of how many people we get applying out of the Rowe neighborhood, and how many seats we have there. So we absolutely have a couple neighborhoods where we get a higher number of families applying. So that's my theory, but I absolutely would have to test it with data, but we could look at that for sure. I don't know if that would make sense as a next step, but I'm happy to ask the team to do that.
I don't know what makes sense either. I'll think about it further and happy to follow up on an email with a clarified request.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Ms. Russell-Better.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question about Superintendent. My understanding was that, I just want to make sure I'm correct in this understanding, that this plan was sort of a bridge until being able to have that more substantive community engagement, and obviously because of just everything this year and trying to get going probably back to the 5-day. Is that correct? I'm just wondering, is the plan for next year for this to be back on the table as a more robust?
Key considerations, at the top of the next slide is that particular issue. So what this does is it begins to move us to a later start for middle and high school that can, be built on in subsequent years.
Okay. And sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just, in following up with that, just when Ms. Thompson mentioned about 2015, and then in one of her questions, I think, about activities, does our doing that work and then making the change depend on other is the sense across the community that other school districts are also moving in this direction? Does that affect our ability to make those changes just because of the after-school activities, or is that just one small piece?
It is a key consideration, and one of the, consistently one of the issues that that thwarts districts' ability to do this is if everybody isn't moving at the same time, it creates problem for us. Paths is another significant challenge. The fact that we host at Paths, that is a different issue. So we may wind up in a situation where we're able to do it at the middle school, but we're not able to do it at the high school, and things along those lines. But we need to engage the community in that conversation, and that's the work that we would begin next year with the goal of, I've looked at lots of districts that have done this work, and it is not a 1 year, let's just announce it and do it. It usually takes a long time, and, it is extensive, and, it's never a, 90% agree, 10% disagree. It's, 60% agree, 40% disagree. So it is, not a straightforward process, but, it's one that I think we should engage in and, make all of those considerations visible to people. And, in the end, as the policymaking body, you'll have to make a decision based on all of that information.
Okay, thank you. Last, just detail for me to understand. I understand the research on middle school, high school age and why a later start time is beneficial. I'm just curious for the elementary level, is right now and maybe for further planning, is the time for those start and ending really just in response to the higher grades and how the transportation and all of that works out? Or is there an ideal start time for elementary that needs to be looked at? Or is that really just in response to the changes? Does that make sense? I'm just trying
I'm not familiar with any, any research on body clocks, biorhythms for younger students. I think there's a significant variation from student to student.
Yeah.
There are challenges with moving to an earlier start in terms of longer after school care requirements for families and things along those lines. There's also less, before care. So I think that's also one of the bullets in here is, to Board Member Thompson's question about our discussions with REC on this. They're aware of what we're doing. They can accommodate what we're doing. They are cognizant of what the impact will be, which is, increased time after school at some of our schools and less before care, which has a financial impact on them, because they charge more for before care than they do for after care. And so to the extent that they lose, business at the start of the day, that is, that's revenue loss for them. They think knowing it, they will adjust to that. It changes their staffing and things along those lines as well. So,
okay.
And then, yes, go ahead.
My one other piece that when you said that, just one concern that comes up for me and Presumpscot, we have had the 8:30 this year, but I'm sorry, could you just quickly clarify for Lyseth, Reiki, and Roe, they already were doing 9 o'clock and it's just Presumpscot? So they've been doing 9 o'clock this year?
No, they've been doing 8:30 this year.
Okay.
But they're going back to 9, which was...
they were doing 9.
They were doing 9
okay.
prior to the pandemic.
So here's my question about that, because to me, I think, oh my gosh, that's so late. And would there be space for before care for anybody who might need it if you're thinking about for families' work schedules? But then if they were all doing it last year, I'm guessing,
there is before care in those.
Yeah, and that wasn't an issue. Like it seemed that families were getting that before care need. Like that wasn't an issue of slots or anything. For that.
I'm not an expert in what their what their capacity was, but there was there was and there will continue to be a before care program for the schools that start at 9 o'clock, so that parents who have to be at work at 8 and things along those lines have that.
Okay, well, I guess I'm just flagging that as a question that I would wonder. Of course, the after too, but for me, that start time changing for those schools, and maybe it's just because for Presumpscot's brand new, as opposed to those schools have done it last year. But I think that's going to be something that some families are going to.
I think that that's why we called it out, that this is a bigger change for
Have the heads up,
than it is for any of the other elementary schools. Because in the elementary schools, some schools are just continuing what they've been doing this year,
right?
Albeit in a shortened, in a shortened school day, so it'll just be a longer school day in all of those settings. And then for Roe, Roe, Lyseth, and Reiki, it's returning to what they were doing pre-pandemic.
I just want to point out in this that Javier, you're saying about how there's the before care, but just as a reminder, we don't yet have that before care plan for pre-K. So just in the spirit of the workshop and all this transparency for our consideration, that's just for the K through 5, not through pre-K.
But that's true today. That's true.
True. Yeah, absolutely. Has been, and hopefully in the future won't be, but just make sure that was.
Thank you.
Ms.
If I could add a couple of things. Ms. Russell-Better, just to put a finer point on it, the American Academy of Pediatrics says that adolescents shouldn't go to school in an ideal world before 10, but realizing we don't live in that world, they suggest that the earliest start time for adolescents be 8:30. So just to help anchor this conversation, I think that's where the medical literature has come down in terms of where we should be. And then a little bit more on the process. Initially, the operations committee was thinking, well, given that we've disrupted the pandemic has disrupted everyone's schedules, wouldn't this be the ideal time to make the changes that we know are needed to better align with the medical literature about adolescent bodies and what is an appropriate start time? And we started down that path and just realized the level of outreach was just too significant to accomplish given the pandemic and everything else that we are trying to do and keeping schools open and further opening schools, et cetera. It was just too much to accomplish. Although, I continue to think, probably ideal because everyone's had to change their schedules. And so introducing more change when everything is disrupted might have been easier. But I think that this takes us, makes a small step towards that and is a good step forward.
And Ms. Thompson, here's the information that you had suggested that we have around the island schools. And, in essence, they're keeping their pre-pandemic schedules. So that is something that we've looked at, as well as the impact on the pickup and drop off for transportation for King and for the high schools from the boats. There was something else I was going to say, and it just poof, disappeared.
I just wanted to make sure that we listed them because I think sometimes the Islanders feel left out. So if we could just list them, but then, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there is in the packet. You have 3 schedules. One that was the 1920 schedule. One that was the 20 and this year's schedule, and one that was that is the proposed schedule. And I actually thought that I had the islands on there, and I'm looking at it now, and I don't. So I apologize. We absolutely need to add that.
And I just want to add one thing, if I could, Chair, to Ms. Russell-Better's question. When we reviewed it in 2015, a lot of the families came forward to saying that the youngsters in the elementary were bright-eyed, bushy-tailed really early. Therefore, they wanted to send them off earlier because they were already up. And the high schoolers, of course, wanted to sleep in. So that was some of the data that we were shown. I'm not sure if there's research to the superintendent's point, but it was pretty well spoken from families that testified saying the kids were already up. And to Ms. Figdor's point about the American Academy of Pediatrics, we had a lot of articles about that. But on the operations committee, we did want to hit pause. And I know our chair was in favor, where there was changes going on already, that now would be the ideal time. But we felt with the parent engagement it was a much larger piece, and sometimes being the historian sometimes is not the best, I guess, because I remembered all the issues that we had back then, and I wanted to hit pause a little bit because I want us to do it right this time, because last time was, needless to say, a disaster. The board really wanted to make the change, and it just fell apart. So I want us to do our diligent work and bring the community along with us so that we can make the change and make it last. That's all. So.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that whole time I was talking was not even on.
No, you were. We heard you.
Oh, I just thought I said mute. I was going to be like, oh, okay, someone muted me. Good. So I'll be quiet now.
No, you would have seen us all going like this, and so. All right, are we ready to move on? Okay. So we'll be taking this up with the Operations Committee on Thursday, which I have meant to talk to you, Ms. Thompson, about a number of times between last week and this week, and I have not. So this is what I was hoping to have on the agenda and bring it back to you for approval on the 18th. We are communicating about this schedule. We've communicated to principals. We are including this in our weekly staff and community newsletter with a place for people to also, an email address where people can send their comments and concerns and stuff like that, so we can take those into consideration. Not a survey, but just an opportunity for people to share their thoughts and concerns about the changes in the schedule. And as we said earlier, this is we're looking at this as a transition, a step in a direction, but not something that we necessarily would stay at. And we definitely want to explore the possibility of going further with the high schools and middle schools into the future. And that's it. This is what I said is in your packet, which I thought had the island schools, and it doesn't, and I apologize for that, and I will make sure that I redo this with that.
Excellent. This is maybe moderate but important step, so I'm glad we can at least get this far. If there isn't anything else from the board, I think we can close this workshop. And then I don't see any board hands going up. So I think Ms. Russell Better. I was speaking slowly. I knew there would be someone.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question maybe for the superintendent about whether our next meeting is to be in person, or is that still to be determined?
I don't think the next one will be. Our goal is still to do in person, actually hybrid in person, so people can choose to either come in person or, do it remotely, with the public being remote before we end the school year. But we're still working through the logistics of that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's all. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent, and to all the staff and board members. And I hope everyone has a good night.